Every debt gets collected eventually. That was the first thing Ronan Varre ever said to her, and the last thing Sabine Creel thought of before she locked herself in a coat closet at the Dunmore Foundation gala and called a man who scared her more than the one hunting her down the marble hallway. The closet smelled of cedar and expensive fur. Sabine crouched behind a rack of donated coats, her champagne-colored dress pressed against the wall, her heels dangling from 2 fingers so the click of them wouldn't echo under the door. Outside, the sounds of the gala drifted in muted waves, a string quartet, laughter, the clink of crystal. Beautiful sounds, the kind of sounds that covered other sounds, the kind of sounds a man like Conrad Reed would use for cover. She had recognized him 40 minutes ago, across the silent auction room, when he shook hands with the foundation's director and smiled at a woman in blue. Conrad Reed, mid-50s, silver-haired, charming enough to get elected to city council twice. He ran the Reed Group, a property development firm on paper, a mid-size criminal operation in practice. Sabine knew his numbers. She had seen the invoice discrepancies 3 months ago, buried in a batch of intercepted files that Ronan's men had pulled from a compromised server. Conrad Reed knew that Ronan Varre's money flowed through a shell company called Crestline Analytics, and Crestline's only human face, the woman who actually sat down and reconciled the accounts, was Sabine Creel. When Conrad's eyes had found hers across the room, something in his expression had shifted. Recognition, calculation. She had excused herself from the group she was standing with, walked toward the bathroom, past the bathroom, and kept walking. Now she was in a closet with a rack of mink coats and a phone at 11% battery. She opened her contacts. She scrolled past her landlord, past her sister in Phoenix, past the number for the car service Ronan's office used. She stopped on a name she had typed in herself, 3 months into the job, on the instructions of a man named Sutter, who had said simply, "Put this in. You'll know when to use it." One name, no last name, no title. Ronan. Her thumb hovered over the screen. She had worked for him for 2 years. She had seen the underside of everything. Cash routed through non-profits, wire transfers disguised as vendor payments, payroll for men who didn't exist on paper. She had never called him. She had never had a reason. She showed up at the office on the 14th floor. She did her job. She went home. She was a number on his ledger, not a person who made phone calls at 9:15 on a Saturday night from inside a coat closet because a rival faction's boss had just clocked her face at a charity gala. She pressed call. It rang twice. 41 floors above the harbor, on a private yacht anchored 100 yards off the pier, Ronan Varre was bored. Not the restless, fidgety boredom of men who couldn't sit still. He had learned long ago to wear stillness like a suit, correctly fitted, impossible to wrinkle. He sat at the head of a low table in the yacht's main cabin, a glass of water in front of him, while a man named Ferris talked too much about import tariffs. Ferris was a broker. He moved shipping containers between 3 countries and had a talent for not asking what was inside them. He had been talking about a long-term arrangement with Ronan's network for 45 minutes. His cologne was aggressively present. Sutter stood against the far wall, tracking Ferris's hands the way a dog watches a squirrel. The phone in Ronan's jacket vibrated. He didn't reach for it immediately. Very few people had this number. All of them were accounted for. Sutter was across the room, his operations director was in Chicago, and the attorney who handled emergencies had standing instructions never to call past 8. It vibrated again, sustained, insistent. Ronan pulled the phone from his pocket and looked at the screen. Sabine. He stared at the name for 1 full second, long enough to register that his bookkeeper, the woman who communicated exclusively through email and expense reports, was calling him on a Saturday night. He stood up. "Mr. Varre," Ferris began. "We're done for tonight." Ronan was already walking to the door. He passed Sutter and said, "Get the car," without breaking stride, and pushed through the cabin door into the salt air of the deck. "Speak." The sound that came through the line wasn't the calm, efficient summary. he would have expected from the woman who had once delivered a 15-page discrepancy report with the emotional energy of someone reading a grocery list. It was breathing, shallow and controlled, like someone trying very hard not to make noise. "Sabine," his voice dropped without any decision on his part. "Where are you?" "The Dunmore Gala," barely a whisper, not trembling. She was keeping it flat through sheer will, and the effort itself told him everything.
"I'm in a coat closet off the main hallway."
"Conrad Reed is here. He saw me." A pause. The sound of something moving outside the closet door, her breath caught. "He knows who I am. He knows I work for you." Ronan was already moving toward the gangplank. "Are you hurt?" "No." "Is there a lock on the door?" "A push button. I locked it." "Good. Stay on the line. Don't open the door for anyone." He stepped off the gangplank, shoes hitting the wooden pier. "What color is the dress?" "A beet. Why does that matter?" "Because I need to find you in a crowd of 500 people without wasting 30 seconds. "Champagne gold." Her voice cut off. A shadow slid under the closet door. She heard it too. Her breathing went utterly silent. "Sabine, stay quiet. I'm coming." He lowered the phone, kept the line open, and slid it into his breast pocket. Sutter was already at the car. One look at Ronan's face, and he held out the keys without a word. Ronan drove. The Dunmore Foundation's gala occupied the entire east wing of the Halcyon Hotel. Valets in red jackets, a donor wall the length of a tennis court, security that would stop a drunk, not a man who moved like he owned the building. Ronan went through the service entrance at the back because the front would mean 3 minutes of valet negotiation, and he didn't have 3 minutes. A catering manager with a clipboard appeared from around a corner and opened her mouth. Ronan looked at her once. She stepped aside. The main hallway off the coat check was quiet, carpeted in burgundy, lit by wall sconces, insulated from the music by 2 sets of heavy doors. He moved down it, reading the doors on his left: supply closet, electrical, staff bathroom, then a door with a small copper plaque that read Cloakroom B. He stopped. "It's me," he said toward the phone. "Cloakroom B, I'm right outside." A pause, the sound of something scraping, the click of a push-button lock. The door opened 2 inches. She looked at him through the gap. Dark eyes behind fogged glasses, mascara smudged slightly at the outer corner, one strap of the champagne dress slipping off her shoulder. Her heels were in her hand. A piece of hair had escaped whatever held it up and was hanging at the side of her face. She let out one shaky breath that she had clearly been holding for a long time. Then she opened the door the rest of the way, and Ronan took her by the elbow and walked. He didn't stop moving. He kept her on his left, his body between her and the hallway, and he moved her down the service corridor, through the loading bay, and out into the cold night air of the delivery alley before she had fully processed where they were going. The black SUV was idling at the alley's mouth. Sutter was behind the wheel. Ronan opened the back door. She got in, he followed. The door clicked shut, and the car moved immediately. Sabine sat rigidly against the seat. Her heels were still in her hand. She was staring at the tinted window, watching the gala's lights slide away, and she had the look of someone talking themselves back from an edge. Methodical, private, not asking for help with it. Conrad Reed shook hands with the foundation director, she said, her voice recovering its flatness, which he recognized as her default setting after stress. He didn't just show up. He's been cultivating that relationship. He had access to the donor list, which means he had access to the guest list. She finally looked at him. "He didn't see me by accident, Varre. He was looking for someone like me." "I know. He'll go back tonight and pull everything he has on Crestline." "I know." She stared at him. "Is that all you're going to say?" "What would you like me to say?" She looked at her hands, at the heels she was still gripping. She set them carefully on the floor of the SUV, very precisely, like setting down something she couldn't afford to break. "I don't know," she said quietly. "I've never done this before." He didn't answer. There wasn't a correct response that he could find. He just watched her, city lights striping across her profile in the dark, and said nothing, which he suspected was still more than she expected from him. He didn't take her to her apartment. She didn't argue when he said they were going to the tower instead, just nodded once and turned back to the window, which told him she had already worked out the math herself. Conrad Reed knew her name and her face. Her home address was one database search away from a man with resources. The tower was on the 32nd floor of a building Ronan owned through a holding company that owned another holding company. The elevator required a key card and a secondary code. The doors didn't open for anyone he hadn't cleared. She walked in and stopped in the center of the room, looking at the floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the harbor. From here, the Halcyon Hotel was visible in the distance, lit up against the dark. "I need to tell you something," Sabine said. Ronan waited. "The invoice discrepancies I flagged 3 months ago, in the Reed file, I didn't just summarize them." She turned around. Her expression was the one she used when presenting numbers she knew were going to cost someone something. "I cross-referenced them against public property records. Conrad Reed has been buying lots along the Eastern Corridor through shell companies. 7 purchases in 14 months. He's not building anything. He's warehousing. And the addresses cluster around your 2 distribution points on 5th and Clement." The room went very still. "He's not trying to expose you," Ronan said. "No." She shook her head. "He's trying to box you in, seize the real estate, control the geography, force a negotiation from a position where you have nowhere to move product." She paused. "He cultivated a foundation board that sits on the city's planning commission. He got the guest list because he's targeting anyone connected to your financials who might stumble across what he's doing. I wasn't the target." Her voice stayed even, but something tightened fractionally around her eyes. "I was the warning." Ronan studied her face. In 2 years, she had handed him quarterly reports, 2 compliance alerts, and 1 memo about a payroll error that had saved him $400,000 and a federal inquiry. He had read her work, approved her retainer, and had not once thought carefully about what was behind the numbers she produced with such mechanical precision. He thought about it now. "Sit down," he said. "I'm fine standing." "Sabine," a pause, "sit down." She sat on the edge of the leather couch, spine straight, as if she were in a waiting room. He poured 2 glasses of water from the kitchen and set one on the coffee table in front of her. He sat across from her and watched her pick up the glass and take 1 careful sip. "You're going to tell me Conrad Reed runs his books through 3 shell companies and a Delaware LLC, he said. She blinked. "How did you know that?" "Because you told me in a report 8 months ago. I read your reports, Sabine. All of them." He set his glass down. "So you're going to walk me through everything you know about those Eastern Corridor purchases, tonight. And in the morning, you're going to help me figure out how to dismantle everything he's spent 14 months building before he understands what's happening." She looked at him for a long moment. The flatness in her expression shifted into something he had no name for. Not surprise exactly, not relief exactly. Something between those 2 things that didn't have a tidy column in any ledger. "Okay," she said. She reached into her small clutch and pulled out her phone. "Pull up the property records for the Eastern Corridor. I'll walk you through it." They worked until 2 in the morning. She cross-referenced public filings against his network's known geography while he made phone calls in the next room. Short calls, clipped, in a voice she had never heard him use, which was somehow even quieter than usual and considerably more dangerous. His men moved the way they always moved when he gave orders, without questioning, without wasting time. By midnight, 2 of Reed's warehouse acquisitions had been legally tied up in a competing permit application filed through a city councilman who owed Ronan a favor he hadn't called in until tonight. By 1, the bank handling Reed's primary LLC had received an anonymous compliance tip that triggered an automatic review freeze, 48 hours minimum, enough to kill his next acquisition before it cleared escrow. By 2, Sabine was sitting at the kitchen island in her socks, Because her heels had never made it back on her feet, eating crackers from a box Ronan had produced from a cabinet that otherwise held 3 bottles of single malt and a first aid kit. "You knew about the Eastern Corridor before tonight," she said. He was leaning against the counter. His jacket was off. There was a bruise forming along his jaw that he hadn't explained, and she hadn't asked about yet. "I knew someone was buying up real estate. I didn't know the pattern." "But you knew it was a problem." "I knew it was a variable I hadn't accounted for." He looked at her across the island. "You accounted for it 8 months before I would have." She ate a cracker. "I'm paid to account for things." "Not like that." She looked down at her phone screen, still open to the property record she'd been annotating. Her reflection was faint in the black glass of the window behind him, rumpled, glasses slightly crooked, a champagne dress that now had a small smudge at the hem from the closet floor. "I was scared tonight," she said. Not an apology, just a fact offered the same way she offered all facts. "I know. I sat in that closet for 6 minutes before I called you." She looked up. "I kept thinking, he'll think I couldn't handle it. He'll think I'm a liability. He'll—" "Sabine." She stopped. "You called," he said. "That's what mattered." She held his gaze for a long moment. "Then told me 20 minutes ago, Conrad Reed had a physical dossier. My photo, my home address, where I grocery shop, my sister's name." She swallowed once, controlled. "He wasn't planning to use me as a warning. He was planning to use me as leverage." The silence stretched thin. "You're not going back to your apartment," Ronan said. "I know. I worked that out when Sutter showed me the file." She set the cracker box down on the granite with care. "I want to see this through, Varre. I know his financials better than anyone in your organization. I know where his money is, how it moves, what's exposed. If you're going to dismantle him, let me help do it right." Ronan looked at her. This woman who had walked into a job interview 2 years ago with a blazer that had a loose button, slid a manila folder of references across his desk with the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what they were worth and had never once treated him as anything other than an executive whose accounts needed reconciling. "Get some sleep," he said. "We start at 6. She nodded. She slid off the stool, picked up her heels from the floor, and walked toward the hallway. "Sabine." She stopped without turning around. He didn't say anything for a moment. What came out was, "Next time, call sooner." She turned her head, just enough to see him at the edge of her vision. Something at the corner of her mouth shifted, not quite a smile, something more measured than that. "Next time," she said, "maybe don't schedule meetings on a boat. The reception was terrible." She walked down the hall. The door at the end closed softly. Ronan stood in the kitchen alone, listening to the city below, and felt something he had not felt in a very long time, the particular, unsettling warmth of a room that was less empty than it was before. He didn't examine it. He went to work. 3 weeks later, Conrad Reed's primary LLC was seized by federal regulators following an audit triggered by an anonymous compliance tip, 3 competing permit denials, and a whistleblower complaint filed through a non-profit legal fund that Sabine had identified, cross-referenced, and routed the documentation to herself in the span of 40 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon. She filed the final summary at 7:15 in the morning, walked into Ronan's office, and slid it across his desk. His Eastern Corridor acquisitions are frozen pending litigation. His capital reserves are tied up in compliance holds. He'll spend the next 18 months in depositions. She stood with her hands loose at her sides, the way she always stood when presenting work she was confident in. "He's finished." Ronan looked at the report, then at her. She was wearing a grey blazer. Her glasses were clean. She had a new coffee mug, one from her own apartment, which she had finally been able to return to, because Conrad Reed no longer had the organizational capacity to threaten anyone. "The button on your cuff is coming loose," Ronan said. Sabine looked down. A thread was pulling free from the second button on her left sleeve. She looked back up. "Is that relevant to this report?" "No." He stood and walked around the desks, closer than the standard distance two professionals maintained, and neither of them moved to correct it. He reached out and pressed the loose button flat against the fabric with one finger, steady and deliberate, the way he closed a ledger he was finished with. "Good work," he said. It wasn't a declaration. It didn't need to be. She was very good at reading what wasn't written, and what wasn't written in those two words was considerable. Enough to account for a closet that smelled of cedar, a drive through the city at 10:15 at night, 2 glasses of water on a coffee table, and a question he had been doing the arithmetic on ever since. "The next quarter's projections can go through Sutter by Friday," she said, and her voice was only slightly uneven. "Sutter will handle the files." He didn't step back. "Have dinner with me tonight, Sabine." She looked at him the way she looked at a column of numbers she was deciding whether to trust, thorough, unhurried, giving it the full weight it deserved. "That's not in my job description," she said. "No," he agreed, "it's not." She let the silence hold for exactly 3 seconds. Then, 7 o'clock, somewhere with a wine list that isn't embarrassing. She picked up her coffee mug and walked back toward her office. Ronan watched her go and said nothing else, because there was nothing left that needed saying. The account had balanced. The exposure had been closed. What remained was something new, unleveraged, uncollected, not yet entered into any record he had ever kept. He found he didn't mind not knowing what to call it. Outside, through the glass, the city ran its calculations the way it always had, indifferent, relentless, hungry. But the numbers in Ronan Varre's favor now included one variable he hadn't placed there himself, and for the first time in a long time, that felt less like a liability than like something worth protecting. He turned back to his desk. He started counting.